Sandringham had seen royal tension before, but nothing like the silence that fell when King Charles made his decision. In one private order, he shifted the balance of power inside one of the monarchy's most symbolic estates. Anne received authority. Camilla received humiliation. And behind the closed doors of the royal household, one question suddenly became impossible to ignore. Why had the king chosen his sister over his wife? Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Charles did not raise his voice when the order was placed before him. That made it worse. The king simply looked at the final page, held the pen for one long, heavy moment, and signed away the old rhythm of Sandringham. This was not a casual household change. Sandringham, the private royal estate in Norfolk, where the family gathers for Christmas and deeply personal moments, carried memories no palace could easily replace. It held family tradition, grief, duty, and the shadow of the late Queen's final years. And now, with one signature, Charles had placed the estate's daily operations into Anne's hands. Anne understood the meaning before anyone explained it. Full operational control meant she would oversee household schedules, estate staff coordination, guest approvals, private event planning, and internal access decisions. In simple terms, whoever controlled those details controlled who entered, who waited, who was heard, and who was quietly kept away. The Princess Royal did not smile. She did not celebrate. She accepted the order with the kind of calm that made the room feel colder, because Anne knew trust from the king was never light. It always came with a burden. Camilla felt the blow before the words reached her. The queen consort learned the decision had already been finalized, and fury rose behind her silence. She had not been personally consulted. She had not been asked. She had been informed. That difference cut deep. For Camilla, Sandringham was not only a royal residence, it was proof that she belonged inside the most private circle of the monarchy. But Charles had just shown her that belonging did not mean command. Charles set the signed order down and looked toward a senior aide waiting near the table. The monarch's voice stayed low, but the sentence landed like a verdict. Sandringham needed discipline, not influence. The aide froze for a breath, then carried the instruction into the next room, where a private staff meeting was called at once. That was when the change became real. Not dramatic, not loud. Real. Camilla noticed it in the smallest detail. Anne's name now appeared where hers once expected to be. A line on a planning sheet. A revised approval route. A quiet transfer of power that no apology could soften. Anne remained steady. Charles remained firm. And Camilla, wounded and furious, understood that this decision was not only about estate management. It had exposed something far more dangerous, a fracture between loyalty, marriage, and royal duty. But before the fury could explode, the palace had to face the people standing at the center of this sudden transfer of power. This was not just a palace adjustment. It was personal. Charles was not simply giving Anne paperwork. He was giving her control over the royal family's most intimate stage. Camilla was not simply losing influence. She was being pushed away from a space she believed she had earned. And Anne, calm as stone, suddenly stood between a king's trust and a queen's wounded pride. Charles understood why Sandringham mattered more than any ordinary estate. It was the place where royal Christmas mornings carried meaning, where family loyalty was measured in silence, and where private grief had once sat beside public duty. Sandringham, in plain terms, was a private royal home and working estate, not just a grand building. And whoever shaped its operations shaped the emotional rhythm of the family itself. That was why the king believed it had to be protected from personal rivalries, quiet pressure, and any office that tried to turn tradition into influence. Anne accepted that burden without asking for comfort. The Princess Royal had spent her life being seen as disciplined, blunt, and almost impossible to bend. That reputation now became her power. Anne did not need to charm the household. She needed to control it. She knew Sandringham worked best when the rules were clear, the staff were not confused, and no private circle could quietly rewrite what generations had protected. For Charles, that made his sister the only person strong enough to hold the line. Camilla felt the change immediately. The queen consort was not standing before the public, but humiliation still found her behind closed doors. Staff who once moved quickly when her office made a request now paused. A secretary asked for written confirmation. A courtier delayed an answer. Small things, sharp things. Camilla saw the pattern forming, and every polite pause felt like a public slap in private clothing. She had not only lost influence, she had lost the assumption that her wishes would travel first. Charles carried the pain in silence. The monarch knew he had wounded his wife while strengthening his sister, and that knowledge pressed heavily on him. Camilla had stood beside him through storms, but Anne now stood where authority had been placed. The king did not enjoy that contrast. He simply believed the crown could not be managed by emotion. He believed Sandringham needed order more than reassurance. William watched it all with careful eyes. The prince understood that Anne's control could reshape future family gatherings, especially Christmas, private dinners, and the quiet moments where royal unity was meant to be performed before the nation. If the Princess Royal controlled the schedule, then she controlled the rhythm. If she controlled the guest list, then she controlled access. And if she controlled access, then every relationship inside the family would feel the pressure. A senior courtier made the change official in the coldest way possible. He opened the Sandringham planning file, removed Camilla's informal preferences, and replaced them with Anne's written instructions. No speech, no apology, just paper moving from one side of power to another. Camilla's anger hardened when she realized the truth. Anne's authority was not ceremonial. It was active, immediate, and enforceable. Yet this sudden decision did not begin in the room where Charles signed the order. It began with one private incident that no one inside the household could forget. Every royal rupture has a beginning. For Sandringham, it was not a speech, a scandal, or a public mistake. It was a Christmas Eve seating dispute behind closed doors, when one instruction was changed, one guest was moved, and one ancient rhythm of the royal household was disrupted. Charles saw it. Anne remembered it. Camilla defended it. And from that night forward, Sandringham was never safe from suspicion again. Camilla's private office made the move quietly. A dinner seating plan had been adjusted before the Christmas Eve gathering, and the change looked small to anyone outside the royal family. But inside Sandringham, it was explosive. A seating plan, in plain words, is the official arrangement showing where each guest sits at a formal royal dinner. And in a family built on rank, memory, and tradition, every chair carries meaning. One of Camilla's favored guests had been moved closer to Charles, while a senior royal family member was pushed away from the central table. That was not a mistake. It was a message. Anne noticed before the evening began. The Princess Royal looked at the altered card, then at the staff member waiting for approval, and her face hardened without a word. She understood what had happened. Someone had tried to bend Sandringham's old rhythm around private preference, and Anne would not let that pass. She asked who had authorized the change. The answer came softly.
Sign here.
Camilla's office. That was the moment the air shifted. Camilla defended the decision when Anne confronted it. The queen consort insisted it was only a practical adjustment, nothing more. But Anne heard the excuse and refused to accept it. She told her that Sandringham customs were not personal property, and that one office could not quietly rearrange family order to suit its own comfort. Camilla felt the sting instantly. Staff were close enough to understand that she had been challenged, and that humiliation stayed with her long after the dinner ended. Charles saw the damage later. The king discovered through a documented household account that two staff members had received conflicting instructions from different offices. One had followed Camilla's preference. Another had waited for Anne's approval. That confusion mattered because royal households survive on clear command, and once staff no longer know whose word carries authority, private tension becomes operational danger. Charles understood that Sandringham had crossed from family discomfort into institutional risk. Anne returned the seating card to the private secretary with a handwritten correction folded inside it. That folded card became the symbol of the whole dispute. Not loud, not public, but unforgettable. The private secretary kept it with the corrected file, and Charles later saw exactly how a single chair had exposed a much larger fight. Camilla never forgot the embarrassment. Anne never forgot the attempted change. Charles never forgot the confusion it caused. That Christmas Eve mistake became the point of no return, and when the king finally handed Sandringham control to his sister, the queen consort knew exactly which memory had condemned her. So when Anne's new authority became official, the confrontation everyone feared was no longer avoidable. The first confrontation did not happen in public. It happened in a private room where no cameras waited, no guests interrupted, and no courtier dared breathe too loudly outside the door. Camilla entered with fury in her face. Anne remained still, almost unreadable, and between them stood the invisible weight of Sandringham itself. The house, the history, and the power neither woman was willing to surrender. Camilla had requested the meeting the moment she learned the new Sandringham operating chain now ran through Anne. An operating chain, in simple words, is the clear line showing who gives instructions, who approves decisions, and whose staff must obey. That mattered because Sandringham could not survive on mixed signals. It had dinners, family arrivals, private services, estate workers, and royal traditions, all depending on one steady command. Anne understood that. Camilla understood it too, and that was why the change felt so personal. Anne agreed without delay. The Princess Royal knew that avoiding the Queen Consort would make the decision look fragile, as if it needed protection from emotion. Anne did not want protection. She wanted clarity. When Camilla stepped closer, her anger was controlled, but barely. She accused Anne of letting Charles dress humiliation in the language of tradition. She said the king had made her look powerless in front of people who once followed her word without question. And Anne listened without flinching. Camilla placed one hand on the back of a chair but refused to sit. That small choice carried the whole message. She had not come for comfort. She had come to challenge. The Queen Consort said Sandringham had become another place where her position was respected in public and reduced in private. Anne answered with calm force, telling her that the estate was never meant to bend around anyone's personal circle. Not hers, not Camilla's, not even Charles's. The words hit hard because they were not shouted. They were certain. Anne then gave the sentence that changed the room. Every staff instruction would now be written, logged, and approved through one office only. A written log, she made clear, meant a record that showed who gave each order and when, so no aide could be trapped between two rival commands again. That mattered because the Christmas Eve mistake had proved how quickly private preference could turn into household confusion. Anne was not asking for cooperation. She was setting the rule. Camilla stared at her as if the final insult had just been spoken. The Queen Consort realized Anne's control was not a temporary warning or a symbolic title. It was a system. It had teeth. It could delay invitations, block changes, and force every request into daylight. Anne remained still, but her stillness felt stronger than anger. Camilla left the room furious. Anne did not follow her. Charles heard what had happened soon after, and the king's response stunned the household more than the confrontation itself. He refused to reverse the order. He refused to soften it. And with that refusal, the real question became colder and more dangerous. Who truly held power now? Power inside the monarchy is rarely announced with thunder. Sometimes it appears in a revised schedule, a changed signature line, a staff member waiting outside a different office. Anne's control over Sandringham was not symbolic. It had structure. It had reach. And when Charles allowed it to stand, everyone inside the household understood that the king had not made a suggestion. He had drawn a boundary. Anne's authority reached deeper than Camilla first realized. It covered estate operations, staff discipline, internal access, ceremonial preparation, private family arrangements, and household communications. Estate operations, in simple words, meant the daily running of Sandringham, who worked where, who entered which room, what events were prepared, and how private royal plans moved through the house. That mattered because Sandringham was not only a family home, it was a stage where the monarchy showed unity, tradition, and control, when the public needed to believe the family still stood together. Charles had chosen one command structure because he no longer trusted competing offices to protect that unity. The king believed confusion was dangerous. One quiet change to a dinner plan had already shown him how fast personal preference could disturb royal order. He did not want staff guessing between Camilla's wishes and Anne's approval. He did not want Christmas gatherings shaped by pressure. He wanted one line of authority, one clear voice, and one person strong enough to say no without trembling. A palace aide watched the monarch initial the final page. Charles paused before completing the signature, and that pause said more than any speech. He knew Camilla would feel betrayed. He knew the queen consort would hear rejection where he meant discipline. But the king also knew the crown could not be ruled by hurt feelings. The crown, meaning the monarchy as an institution, rather than one person's emotions, demanded order even when the family behind it was breaking. Anne felt no victory in the decision. The Princess Royal understood that trust from Charles would make her powerful, but it would also make her unpopular. She would be blamed for delayed invitations. She would be blamed for changed plans. She would be blamed whenever Camilla's circle found a door closed that once seemed open. Anne accepted that burden because she believed Sandringham needed rules more than comfort. Her strength was not warmth. Her strength was discipline. Then the hidden clause appeared. Every Sandringham guest request now had to pass through Anne's office before approval. A clause, in plain terms, is a specific rule inside an official order, and this one carried enormous force. It meant no private invitation, no favored name, no quiet weekend arrangement could move forward without Anne seeing it first. That single line changed everything. Camilla's circle would feel it before anyone else. People who had once expected easy access would now wait. Names that once moved smoothly through the system would now be checked. Anne's office had become the gate, and Charles had given her the key. And once the new rules touched real names, real invitations, and real rooms, the fallout began at once. The first casualties of royal power are rarely dramatic speeches. They are cancelled rooms, unanswered calls, and names quietly removed from lists. Camilla understood the meaning before anyone explained it. Her influence at Sandringham had not merely been reduced, it had been fenced in. And as Anne's office began enforcing the new rules, the queen consort saw the shape of her new reality with brutal clarity. Camilla felt the first cut through silence. Several informal guest requests linked to her private circle were delayed pending Anne's review, and the delay itself became the message. Guest requests, in plain words, were the names submitted for private visits, dinners, overnight stays, or family-linked events at Sandringham. That mattered because access to the estate was never just social. It meant closeness to Charles, closeness to family tradition, and closeness to the quiet rooms where influence moved without being announced. Anne's office did not shout its authority. It simply waited for written confirmation before anything moved. Staff who once crossed between offices now stopped, checked files, and asked which instruction had been approved. Written confirmation meant a clear recorded approval, something no one could deny later, and that change protected the household from confusion. But it also exposed the old habit that Camilla had relied on. Her word had once traveled quickly. Now it had to stand in line. Camilla sat alone after a closed-door briefing, shaken by how fast the estate machinery had stopped responding to her. The queen consort had expected anger. She had expected embarrassment. But she had not expected stillness, that cold, polite stillness of staff waiting for Anne's approval before obeying a request from her office. Camilla realized then that power had not been taken in one dramatic blow. It had been removed through procedure. Charles tried to soften what could not be softened. The king told her the decision was about order, not punishment. And he said Sandringham needed one clear command, because mixed signals had already damaged trust. Camilla heard him, but she did not receive comfort. She heard rejection. She heard a husband defending a sister. She heard the monarch choosing the crown over the woman sitting wounded in front of him. A longtime staff member understood the new reality before most of the family did. He received a revised access list and saw Anne's office placed above every private route into the Sandringham schedule. An access list, simply put, showed who could enter certain rooms, events, and planning channels. And changing that list changed the balance of power. The staff member said nothing, but the meaning was clear. Anne now controlled the doors. William was informed soon after. The prince saw the danger and the discipline at once. Christmas gatherings, private family dinners, future royal appearances, all of them could now unfold under Anne's strict control. William understood why Charles had done it. He also understood why Camilla would never forgive it easily. Camilla's circle felt the door closing. Anne's authority had touched real names, real invitations, and real rooms, and the fallout could no longer be managed by polite smiles. The pressure now moved back to the marriage, at the center of it all. Because the turning point would not come from staff files or royal schedules. It would come from one conversation between husband and wife. At last, the shouting ended. No aides, no secretaries, no royal language to soften the wound. Charles and Camilla stood alone, with the decision that had changed everything between them. For the king, it was duty. For the queen consort, it was abandonment. And in that private silence, the true cost of Sandringham's new order finally became impossible to hide. Charles met Camilla after the first wave of fallout had reached her office. The king knew the delays, revised access lists, and changed approval routes had already wounded her pride. An approval route, in plain words, is the path a request must follow before it becomes official. And at Sandringham that path now led through Anne. That mattered, because the queen consort had once moved through that world with quiet confidence. Now every request from her side carried the possibility of being questioned, slowed, or refused. Camilla did not begin with anger this time. She began with hurt. She told Charles the decision had made her look like a guest in her own royal life, someone welcomed into rooms but not trusted to shape them. The words struck him because she was not performing fury. She was describing loss. Camilla had fought for acceptance for years, and Sandringham had become one of the places where she believed that acceptance had finally settled. Now Charles had made that belief feel fragile. Charles listened, and for once, he did not hide behind ceremony. Ceremony, in simple terms, means the formal rules and rituals that make royal decisions look polished, even when the people behind them are hurting. The king told her Anne had been chosen because Sandringham needed someone who would protect structure without seeking personal advantage. He said his sister could say no without turning every refusal into a personal wound. He said the estate needed discipline before comfort. Camilla heard every word, but the pain did not leave her face. Camilla asked the question that changed the room. Did Anne now have more trust than she did? Charles did not answer immediately. That pause became brutal. The queen consort watched him, and in that silence, she understood how deeply the decision had already settled inside him. The king finally said trust was not the same as authority. But the pause before the answer cut deeper than the answer itself. Charles admitted he knew she would feel wounded. He admitted the order would look cold. But he told Camilla he could not allow Sandringham to become a battlefield of competing loyalties. The monarchy, he said, could survive sadness. It could survive anger. What it could not survive was confusion inside the very house where unity was supposed to be shown. Camilla left calmer than before. But calm was not victory. She had not changed his mind. She had not weakened Anne's authority. She had only learned the truth. The decision would not be undone. Charles had chosen the line he would hold, and the Queen Consort had finally seen that no private pain could move it. Once that private truth settled inside the palace, the outside world began to feel the tremor. By morning, Sandringham was no longer just a royal residence. It had become a headline, a symbol, and a national argument about power inside the House of Windsor. The public did not see the private tears or the silent rooms. They saw one explosive fact. Charles had trusted Anne with the estate, while Camilla stood furious on the outside. And Britain knew exactly what that meant. Camilla watched the coverage from a private sitting room, and every word seemed to tighten the wound. Newspapers framed the decision as a major internal reshaping of royal household authority. Royal household authority, in plain words, means the power to manage staff, schedules, private access, and the family routines that keep the monarchy looking steady. That mattered, because Sandringham was not just another royal property. It was tied to Christmas, memory, family unity, and the public image of a monarchy that still knew how to hold itself together. Anne saw the same headlines and refused to answer them. The Princess Royal understood that public defense would only make the story louder. Broadcasters called her the disciplined guardian of tradition, while Camilla was described as the wounded figure left fighting for relevance. That contrast was painful, because it turned a private family decision into a national judgment. Anne gained respect without asking for it. The Queen Consort lost ground without standing before a microphone. Camilla turned away when one commentator called the move a quiet royal demotion. The words landed with cruel force. A demotion, simply put, means being moved down in power or importance. And even if no official title had changed, the meaning was impossible to miss. Camilla still had status. She still had position. But Sandringham had shown the country that status and control were not the same thing. A single front page captured the whole storm. Sandringham's gates filled the page beneath the headline, "Anne takes command." The image became the public symbol of what had happened. One woman holding the line, another pushed beyond it, and Charles standing behind the decision that made it real. By noon, every conversation seemed to turn on the same question: had the king protected tradition, or had he wounded his own marriage to prove a point? Anne stayed silent, because silence protected the order. The Princess Royal knew that explaining herself would make the decision look personal, and she wanted it to remain about duty. Camilla stayed inside because anger had no safe place to go. The Queen Consort understood that public sympathy was not gathering around her. It was moving toward Anne, toward discipline, toward the promise that Sandringham would not be pulled apart by private influence. Outside the estate, a small crowd gathered near the public road, and one woman said the sentence that traveled fast: "If Anne is in charge, Christmas will feel royal again." That line cut deeper than criticism. It meant the public had accepted the change emotionally before Camilla had accepted it personally. Her fury could not restore what authority had removed. Anne had won the public mood without saying a word. And so the monarchy reached its final verdict, not through a speech, but through the meaning of what Charles had chosen. In the end, Sandringham revealed what the monarchy often hides. Love can sit beside duty, but it cannot always outrank it. Charles chose Anne because he needed control without persuasion, loyalty without softness, and tradition without private interference. Camilla's fury mattered. Her humiliation was real, but the decision stood. And that was the final verdict. Sandringham belonged to the crown before it belonged to anyone's pride. Anne's control became the accepted reality, not because everyone welcomed it, but because everyone obeyed it. Staff followed one clear chain of command, and Sandringham operations began to settle under her authority. A chain of command, in simple words, means the clear order of who gives instructions and who must follow them. And that mattered, because confusion had already wounded the estate once. Sandringham needed steadiness. It needed staff who did not hesitate between offices. It needed one voice strong enough to end the quiet battles before they reached the family table. Charles did not reverse the order. The king let the decision stand, and that silence became its own declaration. He wanted Camilla to understand that this was not emotional punishment. It was a permanent boundary. The crown, meaning the monarchy itself rather than one person's private wishes, had demanded a choice, and Charles had made it. He had chosen institutional survival over domestic comfort, even though the cost sat painfully close to him. Camilla absorbed the loss with visible bitterness. The queen consort understood now that influence once assumed was not the same as power formally granted. She still had her place beside Charles, but Sandringham had shown her where that place ended. Her anger had filled rooms. Her hurt had reached the king, but neither anger nor hurt had moved the order. That was the brutal lesson. A role could be honored in public and limited in private. Anne carried the responsibility without celebration. The Princess Royal knew her authority had stabilized the estate, but she also knew it had damaged family peace. She had not taken control to wound Camilla. She had taken control because Charles asked her to protect what could not be left exposed. Anne became the guardian of order, and that title carried loneliness as much as strength. William quietly understood the deeper message. The prince saw that the future monarchy would be shaped by discipline, not personal pressure. He recognized that Charles had drawn a line that future generations would remember. Affection could not run the institution, and private influence could not outrank duty. William saw Anne holding the keys, Camilla facing the limits, and the king standing between them with no easy comfort left to give. Charles's final private instruction was simple. Sandringham must remain steady, even if hearts inside the family were not. That sentence closed the matter. It meant the estate would not bend again. It meant Anne's authority was real. It meant Camilla's fury had reached its limit. The story ends not with reconciliation, but with acceptance. Anne held the keys, Charles held the line, and Camilla was forced to live with the truth that Sandringham had moved beyond her reach. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.